My inheritance wasn't supposed to come with lessons in shame. While my relatives counted their shares of an $8.5 million estate in the heart of New York, I was left with a worn, outdated coat that smelled of cedar and sorrow. They chuckled behind the polished wood desk of the attorney's office. Dorian reclined confidently, smirking as he joked about whether I could trade the coat for a bus fare. Isa leaned toward her brother and whispered loud enough for the room, sneering that it suited someone who lived like background noise. I gripped the fabric, swallowing the lump of embarrassment threatening to break me. Dozens of eyes lingered, expecting me to fold beneath their judgment. Uncle Victor's glance delivered the same cutting message it always had. I was the uninvited guest at the Grant family table. For a breath, I almost left it behind. This rag passed off as legacy. But something gave me pause. Something in the way the fabric had been folded by her hand, with intention. Not a gift, but a message. At home, when I traced the coat seams, I found it, a rigid bump hidden under stitches. Scissors revealed a secret. An envelope slid out, trembling in my fingers. The paper was brittle, but the words shook me harder than cold air ever could. Leaving the Manhattan office, coat clutched to my chest. Dignity clung to me in threads. Everything there, the marble floors, the gold fixtures, the expensive aftershave clouding the air, belonged to them. I was an outsider, a ghost, the forgotten heir without a seat at the banquet. My name is Elias Grant, 32, and wealth has always been a closed door. I shelve books at a cozy independent bookstore in Albany, where poetry sits gathering dust and the rent grows louder every month. I make enough to survive, but never enough to rest. My grandmother, Henrietta Grant, was my refuge in a world that felt borrowed. She didn't value bank accounts. She valued integrity. After my mother, Lenora, died when I was 10, Henrietta became everything. She fed me stories along with soup, teaching me that strength wasn't about noise, but about staying. Victor never believed that. He joined our family through marriage and treated me as clutter. He ruled his home with a steel hand, raising his kids, Dorian and Isa, with arrogance and ambition. Their lives dripped with wealth, while mine barely scraped by. That moment in the lawyer's office carved the lines deeper. The $8.5 million estate was handed cleanly to Dorian and Isa. Their shared glance said it all. Victory. I was a footnote. My part. A coat. Nothing more. It came wrapped in white tissue like a souvenir, and I could feel the burn before they even laughed. Dorian scoffed, loud and deliberate. Years of loyalty, and this is your grand prize? Isa leaned in, her voice sugary and sharp. Strays don't get trust funds. Victor didn't speak, but his eyes delivered the final blow. His silence confirmed it. This was my sentence. I wanted to rise, to say their riches meant nothing. But no sound came. Just the coat, a symbol of every rejection. I nodded, voice shaking, thanked the lawyer, and left. Outside, the city moved without noticing me. Yellow taxis, busy crowds, steam rising from grates. It was the rhythm of privilege, and I was offbeat. The coat looked like a prop from another decade. Torn sleeves, overpatched pockets. Yet its scent, faint cedar, brought me back to her kitchen. I kept asking why. Why just this? She knew my struggle. She knew how little I had. Why this gesture? A message or a final dismissal? By the time I made it home, anger simmered. I threw the coat down, paces measured by resentment. Their laughter looped in my head. I thought of calling someone, anyone, but there was no one. The bookstore friends wouldn't understand. The rest of my family had faded long ago. I sat in silence, the coat a silent judge. Under lamplight, every fold looked intentional. She had packed it for me. My throat tightened. Maybe it was her final embrace. Still, the pain of the office was raw. I reached for it again, thinking to discard it. That's when I felt it. Something firm beneath the cloth. My fingers traced a line. A spark of hope flickered. That ridge stayed in my thoughts. I hadn't opened it yet, too exhausted, too bitter. I spent the night on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Their laughter hung in the air, taunting. I imagined them drinking champagne on rooftops, celebrating their easy victory. And I lay beneath a flickering bulb, clutching what felt like evidence of my exclusion. By morning, the shame turned to fire. I dressed, coat in tow, and went to the diner. The bell above the door sang like always. I took my usual booth. The coat weighed heavy beside me. Mara, the waitress, poured coffee. She didn't ask. She never did. Her eyes flicked to the bundle. New coat. I shook my head. Old one. My grandmother's. She smiled gently. Then it's worth more than any new one, she said, before walking off. Meant with kindness, her words echoed differently. Worth more? It didn't feel that way. To Dorian and Isa, it was comedy. To Victor, confirmation. They had won. But inside me, the battle raged. Part of me wanted to cherish it as her love. Another part wanted to watch it burn. I still could not say which part of me was louder. After the meal, I wandered through the streets, the old coat bundled tightly in my arms. The chill of autumn scraped against my skin, sharp and constant. I moved past displays glowing with luxury, suits I would never wear, meals I would never afford, and cars I would never touch. Every surface reflected me like a ghost. A man in discount clothes, holding on to something that belonged to a world now closed. As I approached the subway, my steps slowed near a trash can. I stood before it, staring down, coat in hand. It would be easy, just a single motion. Let go, walk away, leave the memory of the will behind, and let the Grant name dissolve into distance. For a brief second, it felt like relief. But then my fingers brushed that firm line under the fabric again. It hadn't been there when I was younger, when she wrapped me in that coat during winter storms. She had sewn it in later. But why? That one question snared me and refused to let go. I pressed the coat back to my chest and descended the stairs underground. On the ride home to Albany, I sat with the coat across my knees. The subway car rattled, full of strangers brushing shoulders, but my thoughts were nowhere near them. That seam haunted me. I remembered how carefully she had folded it, the deliberate way it had been packed, not tossed. She had made sure it got to me, intact. My chest stirred with something uncertain. Could it be intention, not insult? But fear slipped in. What if it was nothing? Just old threads? If I opened the coat and found only dust or meaningless scraps, then I'd have to accept it. My family had been right. I was nothing. By the time I stepped into my apartment, doubt and desperation were screaming. I dropped the coat onto the couch and paced wildly, my pulse rushing. Dorian's cruel laugh, Isa's sneer, Victor's judgment, they rang in my ears like bells that would never stop. Their ridicule lived inside me now. I froze, eyes locked on the coat. It lay still, but it might as well have been pulsing with tension. If I turned away, I would always wonder. If I checked and found nothing, I'd have no more illusions. The choice split me in two. That night, sleep found me in fragments. I dreamed of the warm glow of her kitchen, of her ladle stirring soup, and her gaze, steady, gentle. I was a boy again, scared, hungry for comfort. She turned and spoke. Elias, you don't have to live by their words. Find your own. I woke damp with tears. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I placed the coat on the table, cleared a space, and reached for the scissors. My fingers trembled as I sliced along the inside seam. Every pop of thread was sharp, loud in the quiet of my apartment. When I reached the final stitch, my hand slipped inside. My fingers closed around something solid. A sealed envelope emerged, its edges browned with time. My breath shallowed, the weight of the moment pressing in. This was what she left me. Everything rested on it. The shame, the silence, the what-ifs. It was all here. I stared at the envelope like it might breathe. It was worn, its paper delicate. But her handwriting, shaky, looping, covered the front. I'd seen those letters before, in recipe margins, birthday notes, little instructions taped to cupboards. Seeing them now made my throat close. I picked it up, unable to believe it was real. It was light in my hand, but it felt heavier than my past. I considered leaving it sealed, hiding it deep in a drawer, letting the mystery stay alive. But hope, when mixed with fear, becomes poison. It doesn't soothe, it eats. Dorian's smirk burned in my memory. Isa's quiet cruelty. Victor's silence. They believed I had been discarded. And maybe I had. But I couldn't let that be the ending. If there was anything at all, even heartbreak, I had to face it. I had to know. I placed the envelope down, stepped into the bathroom, and splashed cold water onto my face. My reflection in the mirror was pale, tired, but there was something new in my eyes. I whispered, "You've already lost everything." The words felt heavy but freeing. Back at the table, I took a knife and carefully slid it beneath the seal. The envelope tore with a brittle sound. A faint smell rose, familiar cedar, old ink. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper was thin and aged, the handwriting frail, but intentional. I stared, unable to start. Memories flooded. Her laughter in summer, her steady hands helping mine knead dough, her voice reading me stories under dim lights. She was my home once, my foundation. What if this letter undid all of that? What if it proved that I had only ever been tolerated? The fear pushed me to close it. But in the echo of memory, her voice returned. Elias, truth isn't your enemy. Lies are. I inhaled deeply. I began to read. The first line struck with the force of thunder. My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, then you were the one I had faith in most. I froze. My breath caught. This wasn't abandonment. It was trust. I kept reading. She spoke about the estate and how Victor and his children had always been obsessed with appearances. Leaving them the fortune wasn't a reward, it was a trial. She wanted to observe how they would act when wealth came without effort. She believed greed would eventually devour them, and she wanted me far from that destruction. Then came a revelation that made my pulse thunder louder than the street noise outside. She had other accounts, hidden properties, investments not tied to the grand estate. They had been placed in my name, protected, with detailed instructions in the letter explaining how to claim them. She hadn't left me out. She had left me with everything that mattered to her legacy. I let the letter fall to the table, stunned. My mind reeled, my chest hurt, my vision blurred at the edges. I had lived so long thinking I was the overlooked one, the unwanted heir. But in her own words, I was the one she had trusted most. The coat sat beside the letter, torn at the seams, its worn fabric now warm beneath my hand. It no longer seemed like a joke. It was intentional, purposeful. She had tucked her final message where only I would care to look. She knew Victor wouldn't bother with it. She knew Dorian and ISA would mock it and cast it aside. But she knew I would hesitate, hold it close, and uncover what they never would. I rose, gripping the letter, pacing the apartment with shaking hands. Thoughts swirled wildly. Why had she picked me? Why place this burden in my hands? Didn't she know how small I often felt? Then I remembered her voice on those quiet nights, telling me I was strong, even when I didn't see it in myself. She had believed in me long before I could believe in myself. Yet fear still gripped my chest. If everything she wrote was true, then my life had shifted in an instant. I had never handled real wealth. I had never even dared to dream of it. Could I carry it? Would it change me into someone like them if I wasn't careful? That thought made my stomach twist. I sat again and reread her words, especially the final lines. Elias, wealth reveals who people truly are. That's why I've chosen you. You stood beside me when others vanished. You never treated me like an obligation or an account. You saw me as your grandmother. I know your heart, and I trust it. Do not let them take that from you. Do not forget who you are. The ink swam through my tears. I held the paper close, whispering, I promise. I would not run. I wouldn't let pain or fear swallow this gift. I would follow her directions, reach out to the lawyer, and step into the quiet legacy she had built just for me. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a pulse of hope. I folded the letter, returned it to the envelope, and placed it back in the coat's inner pocket, its rightful place. The coat no longer marked rejection. It was a key, her final offering, her blessing. The next morning, I woke still clutching the letter. My eyes were sore from the tears that had rocked me to sleep, but my body felt solid for the first time in months. I made coffee, sat at the small kitchen table, and read her words again, slowly, carefully, as if I needed to memorize every curve of every letter. The instructions were precise. My grandmother had created a private trust, not linked to the public estate, and had done so with the help of a specific lawyer whose name and number were neatly written at the bottom of the page. My hand trembled as I dialed. I half expected the number to ring endlessly or for someone to scoff at my claim. But the line picked up. Office of Samuel Wright, a calm voice said. My voice cracked as I replied. This is Elias Grant. I believe Henrietta Grant left something with you, for me. A pause stretched across the line, followed by a softened voice. Mr. Grant, I've been waiting for this call. Can you come in today? His office was located in a modest red brick building near downtown. Nothing like the tower where my cousins had raised glasses and celebrated. Samuel Wright was older, with warm eyes, the kind that made you feel seen. He motioned for me to sit, and then passed a folder across the desk. Your grandmother planned this carefully, he said. She wanted to protect you. More than that, she wanted you to carry on what she valued most. Not her name, but her vision. My fingers quivered as I opened the folder. Inside were legal papers, titles, portfolios. There were property deeds in Brooklyn, a farmhouse near the Catskills, multiple long-term investments. The total was staggering, more than I could comprehend, far beyond the $8.5 million that my cousins had fought so viciously over. I stared at the figures. This can't be right, I murmured. It's right, Samuel replied gently. She built this quietly over decades. She told me you were the only one who would understand it wasn't just wealth. It was a tool, meant for purpose. She feared the others would waste their share. But she believed you would build something. My vision blurred. I had lived under the shadow of dismissal for years. Always the outsider. Always the forgotten boy. But in truth, I had been the one she trusted to carry the future. I leaned back, stunned into silence. The weight I'd carried since that humiliating reading began to lift. Dorian's taunts, Isa's laughter, Victor's smug silence. None of it held power anymore. They had celebrated the surface. I had been entrusted with the soul. When I stepped out of Samuel's office, the city felt transformed. The same streets, same cold, same chaos, but no longer hostile. I walked taller. A few days later, Dorian and Isa invited me to dinner, their tone full of fake sweetness. They picked a rooftop restaurant with chandeliers and glass walls, meant to impress. They wanted to show me they were still above me. I arrived wearing the same coat, now sewn back together carefully, the letter still tucked inside like a secret heartbeat. Dorian smirked as I walked in. Still clinging to that thing? Maybe it'll pass as classic if you squint. Isa giggled. You know, Elias, you could have been sipping wine with us in Paris if you'd inherited something real. I looked at them and didn't feel anger, just distance. I smiled, gently, not bitter. You're right. All I have is this coat. But sometimes, the things people throw away turn out to be the most valuable. They laughed, dismissing me again. That was fine. Let them. They'd never know what I carried. And they never would. On the train back, I pulled out the letter and read her words again. Elias, you have the heart to carry this. She had given me more than accounts or land. She gave me dignity. She reminded me that your worth isn't built by what others hand you, but by who you are when no one's watching. Back home, I hung the coat up gently. I ran my hand over the fabric and whispered, Thank you, Grandma. That night, I didn't fall asleep from exhaustion. I stayed awake, not with fear, but with possibility. My grandmother's trust gave me the chance to shape a future that didn't look like the cold arrogance of Victor or the greedy laughter of Dorian and Isa. I had the chance to build something better, something lasting, something she would have been proud of. The humiliation of that while reading had nearly broken me, but it turned out to be the beginning of a truth I could never have imagined. In that cracked office, when the lawyer handed me a torn coat, while everyone else toasted their millions, I thought I had lost everything. Now I know I had been given everything that mattered. The power of that realization washed through me like a tide. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me. She had chosen me. And with that choice came the chance to rise above the people who had tried for so long to keep me small. The days that followed felt like a new kind of life. For the first time, I didn't wake to the buzz of an alarm and the dread of shelving books for a paycheck that vanished before the month was through. I woke to a letter, to her words, to a new sense of purpose. She had trusted me, not as a burden, not as the forgotten grandson, but as the one strong enough to carry her true legacy. At first, I told no one. The weight of what she'd left behind, money, properties, investments, was too immense to speak aloud. But heavier still was the responsibility. I thought often of her kitchen, how she taught me that real strength wasn't about what you had, but how you treated people when you had it. I knew I couldn't let her down. Victor, Dorian, and Isa kept flaunting their inheritance. They posted from Paris, toasted themselves in marble bars, bragged with shopping bags stacked like trophies. They wore the estate like proof of their worth. But behind the filtered smiles, cracks formed. Dorian's arrogance got louder. Isa's voice took on an edge of panic. By the end of the year, rumors began to spread. Their money was slipping. Bad investments. Lavish habits. A lifestyle that swallowed more than it gave. The millions they had gloated over were shrinking fast. Then, one snowy evening, I got a call. Isa. Her voice, once sharp and smug, now trembled. "Elias," she said, "can we talk? Maybe over dinner?" She tried to sound casual, but the strain was there. Dorian messaged me days later, all false warmth and forced charm. I knew what they wanted. They had begun to realize the truth, that I wasn't struggling anymore. I met them again, in the same rooftop restaurant where they'd once mocked me for wearing the coat. Dorian looked immaculate in his suit, but his eyes darted too much. Isa's smile was polished, but her hands twisted her napkin nonstop. They danced around their questions, hinting, poking, trying to figure out what I had without ever saying it directly. I let them talk. I listened with a steady gaze, sipping water like I had all the time in the world. When the moment came, I leaned forward. "You mocked me when all I had was this coat," I said. "You laughed as I walked out of that office. But this coat carried something you could never buy. Her trust. I don't need to prove that to you. But I will never forget how you treated me when you thought I had nothing." Silence. Their confidence drained like air from a balloon. For once, they had no clever retorts. I left them there, not angry, just clear. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer bore their cruelty like a bruise. My grandmother had already healed that the day she gave me her secret. In the months that followed, I began to act. I restored the farmhouse she'd left me upstate, turning it into a community center for kids like me, those who'd grown up invisible, unsure of their worth. I funded scholarships for students who couldn't afford tuition but had the heart to fight for their future. I started to build, not wealth, but impact. Not monuments, but meaning. The coat still hangs in my closet. I don't wear it often, but on quiet nights, I take it out. I run my fingers along the repaired seam and hold it to my chest. It reminds me of where I came from. It reminds me that even when the world mocks you, even when your own family dismisses you, love still has a way of getting through. My grandmother's greatest gift wasn't money. It was the reminder that strength lives in those who keep going, even when no one believes in them. She showed me that money reveals people. Some waste it, some worship it, and a rare few use it to build. She believed I would be one of the few. As I sit here sharing this story, I think back to the day in that lawyer's office when I felt like nothing. If I had thrown the coat away, I would have lost everything. I would never have found the envelope, never read her final words, never realized that the thing I thought was worthless was more valuable than anything I'd ever touched. To anyone listening who feels invisible or cast aside, please hear this. Your worth doesn't depend on how others see you. Sometimes, the smallest, most overlooked things carry the greatest gifts. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just money hidden in a coat. It was the truth that I was never forgotten, never worthless, never powerless. That's the gift I carry now, and it's worth more than any fortune. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Leave a comment below and tell me what part spoke to you most. Hit the like button if you want to hear more true stories told from the heart. And most importantly, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.